It's just money. It's made up. Pieces of paper with pictures on it so we don't have to kill each other just to get something to eat. It's not wrong, and it's certainly no different today than it's ever been. 1901, 07, 29, 1937, 1974, 1987, Jesus, 92, 97, 2000, and whatever we want to call this. It's all just the same thing over and over. We can't help ourselves. We just react. And we make a lot of money if we get it right.
Welcome to Market Makers, everyone. Your home for tomorrow's TA today. Guys, I have a special treat for you. I want to show you the 100-year cycle nobody is talking about. How eerily similar the early 1900s up to 1929 is playing out like the early 2000s up to and potentially 2029. Now, certainly there's a lot of people that go on podcasts, they write books like The Fourth Turning, and they talk about 4 generations. What's a generation? A generation is 20 to 25 years. What's 4 generations then? Basically 100 years. It's just another encapsulation of the 100-year cycle. You can look at it from a term of world war. You can look at it from a term of conflict. You can look at the Revolutionary War, 1776. Go forward 4 generations, you have the U.S. Civil War. Go forward 4 generations, you have World War II. Go forward 4 generations, people say we are overdue for another global conflict. What most people don't realize that watch these podcasters, that read these books, is all of these people, either knowingly or unknowingly, are simply piggybacking on the work that was already done by some of the geniuses of our time when it comes to cycles, Charles Dow and W.D. Gann. I want to show you here on the charts how similar we are tracking on this 100-year fractal. I think a lot of you are going to be shocked and surprised. Guys, if you enjoy this content that I put out for you, please do like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow me on X at Market Canary. I would appreciate it. You want to hang out with us on the Discord, or you want to join our YouTube for members only, you can go ahead and click join on YouTube, get all of our content and videos. You can check out our website, marketmakers.trade, and join the Discord as well. Let's go ahead and jump into this. On the left, as the analog for this, guys, we're going to use the Dow because the S&P did not come into existence until 1957. So we're going to use the Dow. On the left is the early 1900s, starting at 1899. On the right, we're going to start at the year 2000. First couple of things you need to understand is in the first decade of the early 1900s, from 1901 out to the 1910, the market was cut in half, not once, but twice. The first decade, 100 years later in the early 2000s, dot-com bust, GFC, the market was cut in half twice. So in both periods here of that decade, the market was cut in half twice, 100 years apart. Looking at this in 1901, you actually ran up to a top in 1899. You had a sell-off. You ran up to a final top, a slightly higher high in 1901. The market gets cut in half. You bottom October 1903. Over here in the modern market, you had the dot-com bust. You actually ran up to a high in 1999, you sold off, and then you put in a slightly higher high in January of 2000. The Dow gets cut in half, roughly 40%, bottoming in October 2002. Now remember, this is the Dow. The S&P went down 50%, as well as the NASDAQ went down 75-80%, depending what you're looking at on NASDAQ futures. So understand, this mimics very beautifully what happens after a big collapse in the market. 100 years apart, it doesn't make a difference. Doesn't make a difference what the biggest companies are. You know what happens? Recovery. You recovered all the way until January 1906. You make a peak. The market then sells off, gets cut in half once again, bottoming in 1907 of November. What happened after the dot-com bust? You had a recovery. The market makes a peak. October 2007 here on a weekly time frame, the market gets cut in half, bottoming spring equinox in 2009. This is just the beginning of the similarities. Again, key takeaway, first decade of the 1900s, market gets cut in half twice. First decade, 100 years later in the 2000s, market gets cut in half twice. Let's go to the next major event. You're going to be shocked about the similarity of this. I think a lot of people know this, but they didn't put two and two together. What was a major sell-off back in the 1900s? Officially, 1918 to 1920 was the Spanish flu. The market got cut in half. Somewhere between 15 million and 50 million people died. Nobody actually knows the actual death count. Well, do you guys remember what happened just a handful of years ago? We had the pandemic. We had CV-19. The market went down 40% with that. Again, 100 years apart. Roughly within a year or 18 months of the Spanish flu, we had another pandemic and the market collapsed, right? 46%, 46.5% back on the actual top here of November 1919, bottoming in August 1921. And if you look at this from a chart perspective, you had February 2020 bottoming over here. Oh, this was an extremely fast sell-off, bottoming March of 2020. What did both markets do after they had their pandemics? They recovered and rallied. Over here in the modern market, trillions in global stimulus, recovery and rally. And then look how it plays out. I mean, this is just amazing when you look at this. So we had the recovery rally all the way up to 1923, spring equinox. We have March 1923, recovery rally. You put in your peak. Then the market does a nice sell-off of almost 20%. You get a nice sell-off. What about in the modern market? Modern market, you get your recovery rally. You come up to your peak in January of 2022. Market does a 22% sell-off after the pandemic. Just like you did 100 years earlier, 19% sell-off after the pandemic rally, 22% sell-off after the pandemic rally, and then watch how this plays out as we continue to go forward. Over here, back in the early 1900s, we rallied up. Now, what's interesting is, if we move this over, let's go ahead and look at when this bottomed. We rallied up until March of 1925. We bottomed in March of 1925, right? Big sell-off, 9%, 8.5%, 9%. What did we have with the Trump tariff scare? We bottomed, as you guys know, we ran up until January. Here on the weekly time frame, we bottomed in April 2025. Again, a month apart, 19% sell-off. What happened after this 9% sell-off in the Dow? Big rally up. And this is the part I want to focus on with you guys, because a lot of people are on YouTube making predictions about an 80% collapse in the global markets after the blow off top, right? They're talking about 80% collapse, calamity, global depression, everything's falling apart. I think all of that is too early, because look what we did here back in the 1920s. After that 1925 sell-off, the market rallied up, and this is the important part, 1926, because this is going to take us to 2026. 1926, we get a blow-off top rally, right? Blow-off top rally, market capitulates, sells off 17%, and then what happens after that, guys? After that, you get the big blow-off top rally into 1929. This is when the calamity started, was 1929 September, fall equinox, your Black Monday, Black Friday, Black Tuesday. This is when everything fell apart. And right now, you are right here in this cycle. So what this looks like in the modern market, by the way, guys, what I'm thinking is how this is going to play out is, again, we're going to have a blow off top. Track the Bitcoin cycle. Watch my Bitcoin video. The 4-year cycle has played out since Bitcoin was created. You're looking at a 75% loss. You're looking at a top in Bitcoin this year, plus or minus 4 weeks around that November time frame. It depends where it sells off from, but you're looking at a much higher low. 2 cycles ago, Bitcoin bottomed around 3,000. Back in 2022, Bitcoin bottomed around 15. If you sell off from a higher level, you're looking at a Bitcoin bottom somewhere between 30,000, 50,000, substantially higher lows. And then what happens after that? If we look at the market rallying, if we get any type of retracement and we get a pullback and we go up for a blow off top here, you could see the Dow, the S&P rally out to January once again, just like they did in 2021, 2022. They peaked in January 2022. Then 2026 could look just like 2022. Substantial sell-offs. You saw it 100 years ago in 1926, a 17% move. Again, in our modern market, you could be looking at the S&P going down. It went down 28% roughly. S&P futures went down roughly 28%. NASDAQ futures went down 38%. Bitcoin went down 75% after that 2021 top. You could be looking at a repeat of this here in 2026. And then guess what happens after that happens? What happens is you run up till the end of the decade, just like you did 100 years earlier. This also coincides beautifully, if you've been watching my channel, with the 7-year cycle. The 7-year cycle in the modern market has played out 3 of the last 4 times. 2000, 2007, 2021. The 7-year cycle has played out, cut the market in half twice, dropped the market by almost a third in 2022, and that all lines up for September 2028 to September 2029. There's a lot of cycles that hit. This looks like, I think, what's going to happen. I think so much of the narrative in the market is driven about the bias against the economic policies of the Trump administration, and so many people will be caught off sides. 2026 could look like 1926, which would look like 2022. Big substantial sell-offs, but not 80% collapses. I think you're going to get a fast and furious recovery to blow off at the end of the decade, just like you did 100 years earlier, because so far that fractal is tracking absolutely beautifully. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Hope to see you guys on the Discord. Give me a follow on X at Market Canary. Take care, everybody.